remember, like Bob Clark and Doug Campbell.
Rob Clark and Joe Bordelli.
In the heart of Dallas, where legends unfold, a tale of shadows, mysteries untold, but truth is obscured in the depths of the night. The Lone Gunman Podcast sheds a flickering light.
Section 107 of the Fair Use Act of 1976 provides protection to use copyrighted material for research, analysis, education, and commentary purposes. We here at Loose Moose Productions reserve that right. Now, on with the show. Here's Joe B and the Triple B. Hey, Aunt Udine, how's things in Texas?
Everything is going to hell down here in Texas.
And here we go. You're muted, Rob.
I didn't need to have the sound on to know what you said there.
Yeah, I say it often. Thankfully, I'm muted most of the time. Anyway, welcome to the show. This is episode number 308 of the Lone Gunman Podcast, along with my co-host Joe Borelli. We are pleased and privileged to have a very special guest on the show today. She is Janet Bannister, great niece of Guy Bannister. Maybe you've heard of him if you listen to this show. We talk about him often. Welcome, Janet, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's our pleasure, totally. And funny story. So I'm, of course, researching an episode and looking up Guy Bannister stuff. And I come across this little thumbnail, and I'm like, I've never seen that image of Guy Bannister before. So I was like, wait a minute, that's for our podcast. Hold on, let me click on that. And I was like, oh my God. Janet Bannister has a podcast on Guy Bannister. It's called Skeletons in the Closet, Family Secrets. And you can listen to it pretty much anywhere, right, Janet?
Available
iTunes.
on all major platforms, and the only place you can't get it is ironically YouTube. But I'm working on that. I don't know quite how to do it. Maybe you guys can walk me through it later. So
Sure, no problem. We are YouTube experts, right? Right, Joe?
Yeah, you say so.
Totally, right? So, Janet, welcome to the show. And, we talk a lot about the JFK assassination. Well, in fact, it's the only thing we talk about, really. So, and we are a conspiracy-leaning show, but we are document-based and reasonable people. I think we're not those crazy, kooky conspiracy people. Now, being related to someone like Guy Bannister, when did you find out the importance and the significance of Guy, and being related to him and what he has contributed to history?
So I remember even as a kid, overhearing my folks talk about it. My mother, God love her, didn't ever meet a conspiracy theory she didn't love. And of course, that was like a gold mine right in the family, right? Yeah. So I remember even talking about it at school with my friends when I was a little kid and being like, well, my uncle may have killed JFK. And then I get the side eye going, okay, Janet, okay. And I was kind of a weird little kid too, so that probably didn't help. Yeah, I can hear the whole town of Weebo going, yeah. So my folks have always been adamant that Guy had nothing to do with it. And there were other things he was into, which I'm going to go into in season 2. The season finale of season 1 just came out this week, and we go into the JFK years in season 2. My folks have been always pretty adamant that he wasn't involved. And now, for clarity, my mother never met Guy, but knew Mary, Guy's widow, pretty well. They talked a lot. And of course, my dad was probably as close to Guy as far as I know, it was one of the closer ones to Guy. He remembers a lot more than his siblings did. And there are, of course, he's got cousins from Uncle Ross. Ross would be Guy's other brother. Ross survived the longest. He passed away, I believe, in like 2002 or somewhere in there.
Oh,
and
wow.
Guy was the oldest. Ross was the youngest, if I remember correctly. I know I'm going to look back and regret saying that, but I'm pretty sure Guy was the oldest and Ross was the youngest. There was like a 13-year difference between them, so Ross was quite a bit younger, and he has his own family. But Dad remembered a lot about Guy and talked a lot about Guy, and it was so. I remember when the movie came out in '92, I was 11 years old. And I remember them hitting the roof when the movie came out. And it was largely because there was a gigantic difference between what was portrayed in the movie and how he was remembered with the family. And of course, the stories that my family remembers and tells a lot are the stories that are in all through season 1, where he was one of Hoover's original G-men. And he and Hoover were rather close. There was a pet name for Hoover. And Dad he's not 100% certain, but he remembers it being the director. The director is on the phone. And so it was funny because my mother always referred to Hoover for clarity, she always called him J. Edgar, like they were on a first name basis. And so it just kind of makes you feel closer to it. And also at the same time, it's a little bit eerie because in the back of your mind, even as a kid, I remember thinking, it's like, well, was he? I don't know. So there was even a question for me when I was little. So.
Yeah, I know that that big memorable scene at the beginning of JFK, the infamous pistol whipping scene, with him and Jack Martin. Is that what they were upset about, or was it more like the rest of the movie where they do those flashbacks and they're kind of insinuating something more sinister between what was going on in New Orleans back then with Lee Harvey Oswald?
Well, when it comes to the pistol whipping, it depends on which story you believe, because there were about three stories told about the pistol whipping. And Martin told, and you showed it in your episode, the story about the phone bill.
Yeah.
If you look into other documents, and I wish I could just pull these up off the top of my head, but details go kind of like the Peanuts teacher in the back of my head, and I can never remember exactly where I read it. But the Delphine Roberts witnessed the pistol whipping, and she herself told a couple different stories about it too. But hers were fairly close, though. Like, she had mentioned that they were just in an argument and they'd been drinking. But the one that I found the most compelling and probably most likely the truth to me, because Martin was a notorious liar. He was known all around New Orleans as being full of it. That he also, I don't know if you were aware, he was wanted for murder in Texas under his real name.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is not a good man. And Delphine Roberts said in one of her statements, and now, like I said, she conflicted herself, but in one of her statements, Guy caught Martin going through his files, in the act of going through the files. And that's what prompted the pistol whipping. And I find that to probably be the most plausible for his rage to be that vitriolic that he pistol whipped him. I absolutely believe it happened. Guy was out of control at that point. So it's not a matter of did it happen, it's what was it really about. Yeah.
And with your podcast, and look, folks out there, I highly recommend checking out her podcast and listening to every episode, because they said you're 9 or 10 episodes out, and she's not even to the JFK stuff yet, really. Guy Bannister led this fantastical storybook kind of life. It's just insane everything that he was, tied to and into and doing, and you hear about stuff like that anymore.
Almost like a Forrest Gump type of life, right?
Life is like a box of chocolates. So
Yeah.
I've been told by two people, and people close to me, like one was a bestie and one was another relative on my husband's side, that I was full of it and I was name dropping.
Yeah.
And so that was part of what prompted the podcast. Is like, I'll show you. And so
Yeah.
I was able to confirm most of what was told. The most frustrating one was the World War II stuff. I could not confirm the vast majority of his World War II stuff he was doing then. But Dad did call me about 2 days ago, and he found one of the magazines about him while he was in the height of his career with the FBI. So I'm gonna next time I get out to the ranch, I'll take a look at it. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, I loved. I think it was in the first or second episode, and this is in relation to the portrayal in the JFK movie. You said that you wanted to bridge the gap between how you and your family knew him and how he was portrayed in the JFK movie. And I think you said, in all reality, it's somewhere in the middle, right? And we've talked about the JFK movie a lot. It's a great movie, not 100% accurate on a lot of things. It's Hollywood. So it makes me rethink, like, it portrays Guy in a certain way. He's slurring his words. He's really kind of out of control, like you said.
Right.
And from your podcast, I've learned he's a much more complex character than I think a lot of people in the JFK community give him credit for, right? They just look at this little part of his life towards the end, and he's a very mysterious character. He died in 1964, right? I don't think there's like interviews with him. So it leaves it open to a lot of speculation and kind of confirmation bias through the decades, right? So
yeah, it's challenging, and in a way he probably looked pretty close to the way that Ed Asner showed him in the movie, though the material would have been different. There's a lot of factual issues with the movie. But there's a huge change in not only his like personality and his actions when he left the FBI. Right around there is when he had the stroke or received brain damage from a surgery. That is still really, that one was the hardest one to try to surf. Several folks quoted, and this would have been the Anthony Summers. This is how I found out about it, was I was looking at Anthony Summers' biography on Hoover, the secret letter, the one where he makes a really big deal about Hoover being gay. I forget the name of it. But I thought it was full of crap, and I called Dad. And I said, Dad, do you know anything about Guy getting brain damage? And he said, no, not from a surgery. But then the next time I talked to Dad, he said, I'm pretty sure he had a stroke. Like, he had sat and thought about it. And I did. And right after I talked to Dad about that, this website, I'm so frustrated because it's gone. And I keep quoting this Phantom website. I'm so mad. I'm so mad at myself for not using the Wayback Machine. But had an interview with one of the Aunt Marys. I'm pretty sure it was Uncle Ross's wife, Aunt Mary, that had mentioned to, I believe it was Aaron Cohn, that he had not only had, some damage, but that he had a couple strokes. They had a series of small strokes. And that really, it may not influence your cognition a lot depending on where the stroke was, but it apparently, I think it's pretty obvious that it really wildly influenced his judgment and how he dealt with frustration. His window of frustration was always right here, and everything would set him off. There were other incidences where it wasn't just the pistol whipping with Jack Martin. It wasn't just him threatening the waiter with a gun. He also got into trouble when he pulled a gun on some teenagers on a bus who were harassing him. And so rather than just dealing with him, he was not afraid to use his fists when he was younger. He didn't mind tussling a whole lot, which my uncles were also in this. Nobody minds. So
Yeah, tough guys.
yeah, but
It had to be back then.
yeah, and but instead of him taking care of whatever was going on in a way he would have done when 10 years prior, he pulled his gun. And that to me speaks very strongly to his lack of judgment. And you can have a stroke and not be completely incapacitated. We've had family members in the past where they had a stroke and were unaware of the fact that in one instance, the family member was continually having seizures in the portion of the brain in the frontal lobe where she wasn't shaking. She wasn't doing the things you typically associate with seizures, but she would have what looked like tantrums. And it was because of seizures, not because of her being childlike or whatever. And so the brain is a funny thing.
It's subtle, right? Like the difference is subtle. I think you mentioned that on one of the episodes.
It can be, yeah.
We'll combine that with hard drinking too. It's probably a good combination.
Well, and there was so that's how the family grew up Baptist, and I'm assuming Southern Baptist. I'm pretty sure it was Southern Baptist because it's in the South. But he with Baptists, they're anti-drinking, and it was noted on his application by one of his references that he was a good Baptist that didn't drink. Now that could be one of two things. Maybe at the time he was very observant because guy was really hard about rules. Rules were rules when he was younger. And that's why he was so obsessive about procedure. If you ever get the chance to look through, it's publicly available if you want to look through his file. Most of his correspondence with Hoover were suggestions to changing procedures because he was obsessive about the procedure and rules. So it's possible he actually wasn't drinking, but there's a joke that, if you take a Baptist on a fishing trip and you don't want them to drink all your beer, just take 2 Baptists so they won't drink in front of everybody else. So the joke is that there is drinking within the Baptist church, but it's just done privately. So who knows what the truth is there? It could be a couple different things. But yeah, by the time he reaches New Orleans, he's definitely imbibing rather heavily.
So when did he leave the FBI? Was it like the mid 50s or
54.
earlier than that? 54?
It was at very end of 54, and that was one of the mistakes I made. And I was shocked how fast he was snapped up by the NOPD when he left the FBI. So what that really suggests to me, and I was thinking about it later, and I wish I'd have put it in, is that it suggests to me that at some point there was some recruitment going on, because he retired from the FBI. He sent in his letter in November, if I remember correctly, and he started at the NOPD by January.
Yeah, he probably
of the next year. So
yes, he wasn't fired from the FBI. He basically resigned.
He definitely did resign. Now, whether it was under pressure or not, it's really hard to say. It was very common for Hoover, if he was displeased with you, to transfer you to somewhere you didn't want to go. Yeah. It could have been a situation in which they wanted Guy to go to. He was supposedly going to be transferred to Honolulu, and that's why Guy retired. And
who doesn't want to go to Honolulu?
What's that?
Who doesn't want to go to Honolulu?
Well, if you want to be in the thick of it all the time, you probably don't want to go to Honolulu. Well, this was after World War II, so it's not like he would have seen a lot with that. But Mary Jane, his daughter, was ill and had been ill since birth. And so she needed a lot of specialist care, and he didn't want to go to Honolulu because he didn't want her to suffer any sort of setback with her health.
Gotcha.
And now you could make the argument that Hoover knew that and offered that to get him to quit. You could also offer that it was if you D&D, like it's a saving throw trying to save his career because he keeps running his mouth. He never had a filter even before he started drinking. After he started drinking, I mean, it was all bets are off. Yeah. So there's a lot of things you could argue there. I wouldn't be shocked if there was some pressure involved trying to get him to quit. because of whatever actually went down in Minneapolis. If it made it all the way, the complaint made it all the way to the governor, and the senator, it was a big stink, whatever happened. And so it's not likely that, I know A.J. Weberman put down whatever happened in Minneapolis was he botched a manslaughter investigation. The FBI doesn't investigate manslaughter unless it's on like a Native American reservation or under very specific circumstances, or maybe during the commission of a federal crime, whatever. I'm not a lawyer. Don't come at me if I said that wrong. But it's what's more likely is that he had an
like
opinion.
a bank robbery or something.
Yeah, exactly. And it's more likely that he had an opinion about something and let that known and stepped on some toes. Is quite a lot more likely what happened there.
Great.
And it seems like that's the same thing that happened in New Orleans when he was in anti-corruption. But
yes,
before I didn't want to like jump to that.
Yeah, no, it's okay.
I kind of wanted to. So he was part of the FBI before, like the precursor of the FBI?
Yeah, he was part of the Bureau of Investigation before it became the moniker we know today.
In the 30s, right?
34.
Okay. 34. And just briefly, because I want to go through his kind of Forrest Gump type of life. He had in his family relationship with Huey Long, the Bonnie and Clyde, the Dillinger gang. He was part of a lot of things, and it's really crucial when you try to understand the character that is Guy Bannister to go back and see what his early and mid career was like. So if you want to talk a bit about that, I think that would help the audience.
Awesome. Yeah. And this, what I'm about to say, I think comes from this magazine that Dad just found, so I can back it up hopefully in a week next time I get out to the ranch, hopefully. But Dad, the story he always told is that he was recruited to the FBI from the Monroe Police Department because he was a manhunter. He was known for getting his man. Guy was the last one allowed into the FBI with no college degree. As far as I know, that's the claim that was made to me, but that also could be something that was passed down that, I mean, who knows? So, his father, William Henry, was a sheriff's deputy in Monroe Parish, and the claim was made that Guy guarded Bonnie and Clyde's car, and while he was waiting there for the FBI agents to come pick it up, that the FBI agents, they had a conversation and he was recruited to the FBI from there. My sister remembers the story a little differently. Aunt Mary came up and saw us, Guy's widow, when we were, I want to say 13, 14, somewhere in there. And she had a bit of dementia at that point. And all I remember her talking about was Palomino horses. She loved Palomino horses. And she had to tell me all about the Palomino horses. They're just herds of Palomino horses, Janet. And, but she told Ginny all the cool stories. It sucks. But, she remembers it as Hoover being in the garage as well. And that's entirely possible because Hoover liked to get in the thick of it at that point. He was trying to build a name for himself. So it's entirely possible, probably probable, that Hoover was there as well. And he put in, regardless what the truth is, he put in his application about a month after Bonnie and Clyde were taken down. And he was hired this would have been, I think, in November of that year. So it was after Dillinger was taken down. And that was the big kind of surprise to us and the whole family, is that he wasn't at Dillinger's shooting. We all thought he had been. And then I went back to my dad and I said, Dad, where did you hear that he had been at Dillinger? And Dad said, well, I read it. And I went, oh. And so then I talked to my cousin who had told me that too. And she said, well, I read that too. And I went, oh. And so looking at the timeline, there's no physically possible way for him to have been at Dillinger. So now he did, however, help take down one of Dillinger's associates. And what I think happened is that as he told the story throughout the year, somebody misheard and then misreported. because a lot of the work done on his, life and what he had done was from interviews after he died. So if somebody misremembered that, that's a really easy thing for that to happen. He was assigned to New York and New Jersey early on, and Aunt Mary told this great story about going to pick up Guy and met the entire New York Yankees team at the airport, and she loved to tell tales, and after he'd leave in New York and New Jersey, he was, I believe he was in Indianapolis for a little bit too, and then was bumped over to Butte because he told Hoover that the FBI was a prostitute trying to retain its virginity.
Yes. And you referred to Butte as Siberian.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and I actually like Butte. Dad loves go to Butte. Dad'll do it. He hardly ever leaves the farm, but he loves to go to Butte. And it's, if you ever get a chance, Butte is, I mean, I'm saying this, I'm not paid. Nobody's giving me anything from Butte. I love to go up to Butte. And everybody jokes about it being, the Berkeley Pit. And yes, there is the Berkeley Pit, but the historic downtown part of Butte is so much fun. And you can go deep in the mines, and then they turn the lights off and all this. Oh, it's really creepy. But he spent most of his time in Butte. He was in Oklahoma City there a little while later after, and then went back to Butte. And then from Butte went to Minneapolis, then Chicago. And there was another YouTube podcast on Guy. I don't know if you guys had watched that one. I forget the name of the podcasters, but they made the claim, they told this really fantastic story about Guy raiding the German embassy in New Mexico, and that he bugged it and all this other stuff. And it was a great story, but then they immediately followed that great story up with, and Hoover was so pleased with Guy that as a reward, he gave him the posting in Chicago. Well, that didn't happen for like 10 years after that. So that timeline, that math ain't mathin'. And I'm really bad at math. So if I can math it, that's like really bad. Yeah. And the other problem with it was Chicago's not really a reward. That's one of the least desired posts in the FBI at the time, because
that's a gangster central back then.
Yeah, with the difficulty. And actually, my nameless FBI friend said a lot of people preferred being in the more outermost offices like Butte because it was more interesting. You didn't work just in one division that did all like kidnappings or all bank robberies. You had a little bit of everything. So he said that a lot of folks preferred to be out in the smaller offices. So, and then after that is when he went to the NOPD. And now I can't remember what your question was. So did I veer?
It's okay. No. I was going to say, you spoke about kidnappings, and I think you had a whole episode on it. I didn't know how prevalent it was.
Oh, it was awful.
30s, 40s.
And it was the worst, and it kind of peaked by 1938, if I remember correctly. So,
and Guy Bannister's younger brother, Ross, was kidnapped.
He was. And I didn't know anything about that. And then it was in the file the FBI sent me with a news clip about it. And I didn't look through most of the clippings. I just was looking through the main file, and Dad wanted a copy of everything. So I put it on his computer for him. And then I get a call about a week later and goes, "Well, I forgot Ross was kidnapped." And I was like, "What?" And so then as I looked it up more, it's funny because you get a little window into Ross, because while Guy was pretty badass himself, Ross was pretty hard bitten as well. And there's a lot of stories that Dad told when they were young that I won't pass on. I'll keep those private. But he was tough. He survived a lot. Yeah. Ross was.
So. World War II veteran, right? Was that the Midway thing? Or?
Dad was pretty sure he was at the Battle of Midway. I do know he served. It was in his, because Ross was also a state senator. And he worked for the Louisiana Highway Department. I'm a little foggy on whether he worked for the state police or the highway department, or if those are the same thing in Louisiana. I'm not real sure. But I do know he served in the Navy, but I'm not 100% certain if he was at Midway, because Dad wasn't 100% certain.
But can you remind me how that ended with the kidnapping with Ross?
They were debating, so they picked him up. The kidnappers were 2 convicts that were escapees, and they had damaged the vehicle they'd already stolen in another state, and they needed another vehicle. So they saw Ross. It was late at night. It was about 9:45 at night. They saw Ross, and they held him up at gunpoint, and they one of them climbed in the car with Ross and made him follow them to a quarry where they ditched the old car, and then they both hopped in with Ross and kept holding Ross at gunpoint and made them drive. And so then they made him drive to a pharmacy, and at the pharmacy they bought medical tape, and then they tied Ross up. And they were debating whether they were going to kill him or not. And then they wound up ditching Ross kind of on the side. I think if I remember correctly, I'd have to go back and look, but he got ditched on the side of the road, and he got free of the tape and walked back to town. So he came out okay, but it was kind of a near thing. But the funny thing, that's what struck me about Ross, is that in his interview with the police, he was talking about how, and Ross is young, he's 18. He said, these guys were talking like they were trying to impress me, and they were very worried about their image as hardened criminals. And he's like, they're full of shit. So that kind of just gave, like I said, a window into kind of Ross's character. So
yeah. And how do you think that affected Guy? Having his,
I think he would have been ballistic.
Right?
Yeah, he would have been ballistic. And the other thing I don't understand about that particular kidnapping is there were 2 offenses that were federal in that kidnapping, because they had stolen a car and taken it over state lines. Yeah. And it was a kidnapping. The FBI at that point had, oh, wait a second. No, was this in 29? I think it was before the FBI had jurisdiction. No, it wasn't in 29. Good gosh, when was that? Because Huey Long was governor, I think. So it had to been the early 30s. Oh, gosh, I can't remember. I'd have to bring it up. It does matter, because after the Lindbergh baby kidnapping, that's when the FBI got jurisdiction.
Yes.
But I can't remember exactly when Ross was in there. It's in the podcast. Just listen to the pod. It'll be all right. But the what was I saying?
You were talking about the Ross kidnapping.
Oh, right. And
I felt about it.
Oh yeah. Guy had recently become an agent. It was really close to the beginning of his career. But anyway, sorry, that's what I remember what I was saying now, is that the interstate transport of the vehicle would have made that FBI jurisdiction. Right. I don't know why it was investigated by the Louisiana Bureau of Investigation, but that was one of the most crooked organizations in Louisiana at that time. So they're not exactly known for following rules. They actively, the LBI actually, if it is the same bureau that was mentioned in the Kingfish book, they actually did kidnappings for Huey Long, and warrantless search, warrantless arrests. It was pretty scary. But the LBI did clear the case. They found, I think, at least one of the convicts was found. They found Ross's car totaled upside down in a ditch. But yeah, I don't know why that was not investigated by the FBI. That said, Guy would have been ballistic, and I have a hard time believing that even Guy was probably in training at that point. And I have a hard time believing that he wasn't trying to at least pull some strings to try to help get his brother back. He would have been pissed, beyond pissed.
Wow, fascinating.
I know, this stuff is so crazy. So, all right, we know Guy was portrayed in the movie JFK, but he was also in, I believe, was he in Don DeLillo's Libra?
Yeah, and I have the hardest time saying Don DeLillo's Libra.
I know.
I had to re-record that sucker like 25 times. I'm not even
DeLuise.
Yeah.
Mom has trouble with his health too. It's an inside joke.
I have trouble saying Liberty Lobby. I say Liberty Lobby.
Liberty Lobby.
Yeah.
Nice. I even teach diction. I can't say L's very well. So, but I'm a choir teacher, so that's what we do. In Libra, my uncle actually really liked that book. not so much that I haven't read the whole thing. I just read a couple sections where they portrayed Guy just to kind of get a vibe check and see how they portrayed Guy. And it was probably the closest. Libra was probably the closest as to how we remembered him. Who was the other author? The one that had the Cold 6000. What was his name? I forget. He
Summers Weberman.
No, it was a fiction. It was fiction. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but the language that he used and the way he portrayed Guy was so offensive I couldn't make it past.
James Elroy.
Thank you. It was so offensive I couldn't get past like 7 pages in it. He like had Guy dropping the F-bomb like every other word. All of his characters did, though. It wasn't just Guy. And then I mean, I do like me a good swear word now and then, but it has to have a little artistry. You can't just sprinkle that shit everywhere,
Yeah.
But it was more about like he had Guy pissing his pants and passing out at a table and all this other crazy stuff. He just kind of really leaned into that stereotype from the movie. I don't remember if that was published before or after the movie, but they leaned in it.
I think it was 95.
Was it?
I was looking at it just recently.
Yeah.
And movie was 91, 92, JFK.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as well, up until I guess the late 50s and early 60s, Guy is running a business. He's renting space. He's supposedly doing these investigations, although I don't know exactly what he was investigating or if he was having other people do his work for him. You know what I'm saying? Because there seemed to be a lot of investigators claim to have worked for him, in that time period. Many of them, in fact, including like Jack Martin. And I was actually going through a file today, and I found a bunch of old newspaper clippings, and it was during the time of the Garrison investigation. And this newspaper was interviewing Jack Martin's wife at her house. And this is a time when Jack Martin he fled to Houston for something. And then he'd come back and said that he was going in hiding because he was scared for his life. And so they were interviewing his wife, and they talked, they were asking her questions about things. And then whoever was writing the article made the comment in passing that in Jack Martin's house, he has a signed picture of Guy Banister, like a framed, signed picture. And which makes sense because even in the police report from, the pistol whipping, he was very complimentary towards Guy and thought of him like a father figure, basically, and didn't want to press charges. He's like, I can't do that. I can't do that to Guy, almost like he held a deep respect or, some kind of weird fatherly love type thing for him because of how much Guy had helped him out throughout the years. So I thought that was pretty cool, to come across that.
And that's actually one of the situations that I question quite a bit. And here's my take on that fatherly, I can't, prosecute Guy. He's like a father to me. Before the pistol whipping, Guy had been telling people in the office to stay away from Martin for weeks before the pistol whipping because he was a dangerous guy. And that was I think I found that in the Warren Commission records. It was either Warren Commission or HSEA. I can't remember which. Oh no, it might have been even Garrison. I can't remember. In my head, picturing all these documents, they all start to look the same. And then I can't remember. It was the first set I looked at. So it must be the Garrison Commission because it was the first set I looked at. Where Guy had gone around and said, hey, don't mess around with Jack Martin, especially it seems like the women in the office. He was warning about Martin. Martin was a cagey kind of guy. And I think he was like a father to me comments may have it's absolutely plausible that they were that close. Absolutely plausible. But in the light of the fact that he was warning people to stay away from Martin, it makes me think that that was a little bit more complex. I also think it's possible that Martin said that he was like a father to me comments to get the police to back off from investigating out of concern of them finding something else out that he was trying to hide. Um, that said, the Garrison Commission is, I think, probably the least reliable of all the commissions because of the number of witnesses who either knowingly lied, Garrison's, or when Garrison himself lied, or when he included shaky testimony to prop up the case. So it's hard to make any sort of determinations off of the Garrison Commission. It's kind of fruit of the poison tree.
It's true.
Mhm.
And Martin, of course, had his issues with alcohol as well.
Absolutely, and he was known around town as being really annoying and talking a
Like
lot
a
of shit.
hanger-on type.
Yes, and talking a lot of shit, and Garrison makes a big deal out of Martin being desperately afraid. And he frames it as he's afraid that somebody's going to take him out because of what he knows is how Garrison framed it. I find it entirely plausible that Martin was afraid, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he was involved. It could be of the 800 other people he'd pissed off that week, and so it is not really evidence of involvement in the conspiracy per se. It's evidence that he's kind of a jerk, makes everybody mad, and he also was into stuff that he shouldn't have been into, like Guy was also into stuff he shouldn't have been into. And both of those things can make people go after you for reasons other than JFK.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because the day after this pistol whipping incident, which is the day of the assassination, the day after you have Jack Martin going to the cops or to the FBI and basically dropping a dime on David Ferry and telling them how he thinks that he was involved and that Ferry knew Oswald. And that's how all this crazy stuff got started. Of course, it wasn't until 3 or 4 years later that Garrison, went about investigating all this stuff. And I think I told you too when we talked earlier that had Guy Bannister been alive during the Garrison investigation, that things could be dramatically different.
Very different. I agree. Yeah. And Dad remembers Guy having dirt on Garrison. Now,
he had dirt on everybody in the United States.
He did. And there's a big but in there, and I always say, "Hey guys, there's a big but" in the middle of class, and then the kids go. So, and I have to watch myself. It's impossible to not say double entendres in front of middle school students. Oh my gosh. So the giant but that's in there is that.
That's what she said.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There you go. See, you can do it. You can keep up with middle schoolers. I got burned today bad by one of my altos. But anyway, what was the question? It was about ADHD. I don't remember.
Oh, I was thinking if Bannister was still alive when Garrison started his investigation.
Okay. Yeah. So the thing is like, and this is what really struck me when I was researching the NOPD episode. Even a lot of folks perceived Guy being hired by the NOPD as a vanity sort of hiring to try to make it look like they were trying to do something about the corruption, but not really do anything about it so everybody could keep the status quo. And we're quite surprised when he got in there like a pit bull and he wouldn't let it go. And he wouldn't let it go. And he wouldn't let it go. And because Guy could never in his entire freaking life read a room or do anything that would be more politically expedient to get something done in anything other than just telling somebody they're an asshole or telling somebody you're corrupt. He was very direct. And he kind of dug his own grave in the NOPD in that respect because he made the wrong people mad. And so when it comes to my dad remembering Guy having dirt on Garrison, I do think it's entirely possible that he switched the names in his head because it's very well documented that he had dirt on Morrison.
Was the mayor at the time?
The mayor, yeah. The mayor was crooked as the day was long. And
Mm-hmm.
so I do think it's plausible that it wasn't about Garrison, it was about Morrison. Now, that said, Garrison was in this entire milieu of, is that a milieu? That's a thing, right? Of all of these,
We say it all the time here.
corruption. Ooh, yeah. See, I'm fancy and I'm fitting in. This is great.
You have to say croissant afterwards.
Croissant.
You know. Yes.
But Garrison is not only surviving but thriving in this milieu of corruption. And even Garrison supporters that I've talked to have said that they wouldn't be surprised if he was also on the take, because that's kind of how it was down there. And now you take that kind of level of corruption and you take somebody as hard-nosed as Guy and you throw it in there. It's like throwing gas on a fire. Everybody's going to scorch their eyebrows off, and like nothing really positive is going to come out of it because he just made it all explode. And that, again, is shortly after he had the stroke. He wasn't exactly very good at controlling his mouth beforehand, and he was extra not good at it after the stroke. And so it was just kind of doomed to fail. But I think if Guy had been alive during the Garrison Commission, he would have had the receipts to hit back.
Because like Garrison and the NOPD and the FBI, you know, they just kind of blind-eyed certain things like Carlos Martinez. Hey, this giant mafia guy is right down the road, this tomato salesman, you know, and none of them, you know, well, I mean, at the time, you know, the FBI wasn't going after the mafia anyway, but for Garrison or the NOPD to turn a blind eye to what's going on in their own parish, tells you a whole lot.
Agreed. I agree. And I think it's terribly convenient that Garrison made the center of the conspiracy somebody was dead. I think that's terribly convenient. Now, that said, sometimes there's smoke because there is actual fire. It just might not be the fire that you're thinking it is. So Guy was into things in New Orleans. He told Dad about it. I mean, he was very open about the fact he was trying to help overthrow Castro. The training scene at Lake Pontchartrain in the movie where he was training the expats, that happened. And he was, so here's what's interesting. Dad remembers Guy telling him he was doing that at Pontchartrain. Dad remembers that, but it was before the Bay of Pigs, not after.
Huh.
That's what the best of Dad's memory was. Guy was very open about how much he hated Castro. Of course, he was a rabid anti-communist. And I got a little window into what his thinking was on that, in that he was handing out leaflets, a lot like Oswald was, but he was handing out leaflets. I believe it was at Louisiana State University, but I could be wrong about that, in which his purpose behind going after Castro was not only the communist angle, but he felt he was handing out leaflets where it was showing what was happening to kids in Cuba at the time. And so Guy thought, I do think Guy genuinely thought he was trying to free and oppress people. And that's to the best of what I've read, what Dad has told me, what he's told other family. I really do think Guy was genuinely trying to free the Cubans. Now, my brother likes to point out, most of the family leans away from him having actually been involved in the Kennedy assassination. All of us are like, yeah, he was totally involved in the Cuban stuff. No, yeah, that's not even a question. But it's kind of a sword that cuts both ways. He was so dedicated to the idea of the place and the sanctity of government, along the lines of the rule of law is the rule of law. And that is the guy that would have absolutely been in the driver's seat before the stroke. But my brother also likes to point out, he said, well, you know, he could have felt that Kennedy had so violated his oath of office through because of the Bay of Pigs. Guy had never been a fan, but the Bay of Pigs, he felt like he left the people that he had worked with out to dry to be taken by the Cubans. And after the Bay of Pigs, my brother likes to point out that he's like, what if he felt like he had no other choice? You see, this
and he's right in the middle of a hotbed in New Orleans with all these Cuban exiles that are all over the place in the same building as him, all over the neighborhood. You know, and David Ferry, you know,
oh God, David Ferry, oh my Lord! Immediately,
you know, people go to the JFK movie, but you got to get the Joe Pesci version of that guy out of your brain. Because when you actually, seriously though, when I heard an interview, it was in Garrison's office. They were interviewing David Ferry, and he sounds nothing like Joe Pesci. You know what I mean? He doesn't sound like effeminate or anything like that.
No, deep voice, very
very intelligent, very authoritative.
We've played it,
yeah. You know, and this guy was, you know, he just sounded like the type of guy who could, you know, sway your thinking. Like he was a motivator type of guy. And you know, these guys are all around Bannister constantly in his office, you know, so, and they're always talking about things. You read these interviews, like I've been interviewed with David Lewis, you know, who kind of works for Bannister off and on. You know, and he talks all the time that, you know, about what he saw. You know, he'd come into office and Ferry would be in there, and Carlos would be in there, and Sergio Acosta-Smith would be in there, and they'd be talking. And as soon as he walks in the room, they shut up and shut the door, you know. And it's just, you know, you hear all these things that are like, I think there's like 13 witnesses who claim to have seen Oswald in and around Bannister's office in the summer of '63. That's a lot of eyewitnesses. I can understand one or two, you know, maybe, okay, but you know, there's a lot of testimony who puts Oswald in his immediate vicinity, including conversations that they had on Canal Street, out in front of his office. You know, he was seen talking to Bannister. This guy, William Gaudette, who was a CIA asset, said he saw him talking twice in deep conversation. You know, it's just, and everything that, you know, when you think about what Oswald was doing down there. Okay, so he goes into a Cuban store and he says, you know, hey, I'm on your side. If you know, I have this handbook, you know, I'm trained in guerrilla fighting. I can help train your Cuban exiles, you know, to fight against Castro. And then the next day he sees him on the street handing out pro-Castro literature, you know, which is when Oswald got arrested and all that. It just seems to me like Oswald was playing some kind of a game down there, or I know a lot of these things, you know, you set up this fake Fair Play for Cuba committee, and you try to recruit people to join, you know, the organization, and then you can immediately out them as communist or commie lovers, and you know, your name goes in the file, you know, you now know communist. Stuff like that. And there's, you know, plenty of allegations that he was an FBI informant when he was in New Orleans and things of this nature. It just gets so convoluted. What do you think about the allegations of Oswald being in and around Bannister's office back then?
So and I mentioned this to Triple B in a phone call, but what I would like to reintroduce skepticism to the JFK research community, because let me give you an example. So, like, let's say we talked earlier about Guy, Uncle Ross, rather, being kidnapped, right? So, if you were using kind of a conspiratorial thinking, you could very easily say the following, which would be, you mean to tell me that just after Guy Bannister is hired by the FBI, that his brother was kidnapped? Does that sound, you know, like you can connect these things and make it sound really, really sketchy. Same deal with that memo. That's why that memo got me. It looked really sketchy right toward the end of his career, and then suddenly he quits. looked really sketchy. Probably just maybe related, maybe not, but not nearly as scary as it looked. Because of the names that were on that memo, it was Hubert Humphrey and Orville Freeman, Freeman was the Secretary of Agriculture under Kennedy. And then, of course, Humphrey was future vice president. So having those two names on a memo right at the end of his career looked really, really sketchy. So it is one of the things, and it was author, here he is right here. I have him right here. John McAdams. I always call him Doug on accident, but one of the things he likes to point out, and I don't want to get you in trouble with the copyright police, so I won't read it aloud. But he said that in a lot of conspiracy theories that you can make a towering pile of evidence that is rather shaky, that one blow and it just all comes tumbling down.
100%.
And my other degree, I teach music, but my other degree is in sociology, anthropology. And I find conspiracy theorists, I study a lot of cults. It was always my students when I was teaching high school sociology. It was their favorite unit was to do cults, and they could do either political cults or religious cults. And a lot of those religious cults were doomsday cults. There was actually one kid found an actors cult in Western Montana. Yeah, and he lived right next door to it. So he did a presentation on the actors cult where these actors came in and paid a bunch of money for acting classes and then got wound up being used for free labor to build this camp. But when you look at conspiracy theories, and I the one that always pops to mind is Koresh and Waco. Koresh was the master of making things appear to be related. So what he did is he had this what he would say is he would tell all of his followers, like in this very highly biblical language, like they're going to come in fire and they will be tested by fire and all this other stuff. And then in the background he's stockpiling illegal weapons. And so he was creating the situation. He was actively creating the situation that led to the Waco.
Manifest destiny. Yeah.
He was manifesting and then he got to die as a martyr. And I think he probably hoped that he would come out of that alive, so that he was intensely narcissistic. But it made him a martyr. It lionized him in a way that he did not deserve. He gave him credibility he did not deserve. And my concern when I'm looking at all of this stuff, especially like the stuff in New Orleans, because a lot of it was heavily investigated by Garrison, is people lie all the time, or they're mistaken. And for lots of reasons. Sometimes they want to be relevant. They want to be the one that can say, well, I was there when blah, blah, blah happened. They want to be relevant. They are doing something they shouldn't be doing and are trying to distract from that. You can lie about X because you're doing Y. It's not necessarily that you're doing X and you're lying about X. It can be two different things that you're lying about. One of the really well-documented issues, like with Delphine Roberts, is she changed her story 3 times. Each commission, the story got a little more grand. And by the time she got to the Anthony Summers book, it was even more over the top. And she was paid by Summers. And actually, Summers got into a really tight spot. Her attorney pulled a gun on him. And it was really kooky. And McAdams was really good at documenting a lot of these problems. So did Posner. And I know that Posner is a dirty word in a lot of communities. Posner's mistake is leaving stuff out, in my opinion. There was things he was either unaware of or didn't include, but the way in which he approached was meticulous. So you could definitely attack Posner's findings because he was ignorant of a lot of things. But the way he approached it was he tried to be very methodical. So when it comes down to, was Guy involved, and like that whole, everybody that's coming in and out of 531 Lafayette, it's very difficult to discern if the conspiracy was the Cuban stuff, where he was trying to help overthrow Castro legitimately, if it was CIA. And that is something I'm still wrestling with, because the CIA put out a document where they disavowed all knowledge, or like they said, we never worked with him. We considered it, but his detective agency was failing and we didn't want to, mess with that. I don't believe a darn thing that the CIA said. They're probably, I did an interview with a gentleman who's helping with the lawsuit against the CIA. And he felt that the CIA and the Secret Service were probably the most egregious on the destruction of documents, and trying to hide things. So I find it very hard to believe that the CIA guy was not involved with the CIA, because we do know he was involved with the Bay of Pigs. So he had some sort of relationship. It had to have been there.
Wasn't the CIA headquarters in New Orleans, like right across the street from?
That was ONI, I thought, but maybe I'm wrong.
I thought they were all in like one building.
Mm-hmm.
I could be wrong.
Yeah, and the sheer number, and here's what makes me question. I'm explaining your question in a very roundabout way, and I apologize.
No, you're fine.
The sheer number of people who either claim to have been CIA, or there's a document on them in that area, is absurd. It almost passes the point of believability. Now that said, the CIA at the time was also out of control. So who knows, maybe they did plant that many people. And also having a relationship with the CIA doesn't mean you're an operative, doesn't mean you're trained, doesn't mean that you're
on the payroll, or
right.
Yeah.
I actually took care when I was younger. I was a CNA at a nursing home, and we had an ex-CIA agent in the nursing home, and even through her dementia, not a word. She thought everything was a training exercise. So when we got her up for breakfast, it was along the lines of, "Oh, what's the exercise today?" But she said nothing, absolutely nothing. It was very interesting. But
that's why they use their assets to do the dirty work,
right?
Because it can't be tied back to them directly.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. That
people claiming to work for the CIA probably were indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
But you'll never be able to prove it one way or the other.
Well, and you may not know either.
That's exactly what another person I've interviewed pointed out is he's a guy might have been working for them and not realizing he's working with them. And here's the really interesting thing, and I think JFK researchers need to take a really close look at this, because I found this information really rather easily. Just on a web search. And I think the author, if I remember correctly, was also McAdams. Before he passed away in 2021, I think, but he had a blog on all of his research for years.
His website still up. Yeah.
And so the thing was that he noticed, everybody seems to know about the fact that men from the government came and took Guy's files out of 531 Lafayette after he died, because Mary reported that. Aunt Mary did. What often wasn't noticed is that years later, when she was asked about it again, she was not super sure if it was FBI or CIA, or she said just guys from the government. She's like, I didn't check badges. It could have been the CIA that has his files. And I personally think that's probably likely, because the FBI, how they do their files, my FBI friend explained a lot of this to me. He was a specialist with the files. And if Guy's stuff from his office had been seized by the FBI, it would have been part of the files that were released by the FBI in the JFK assassination files. Now, there's not all of the files have been released. That's what that lawsuit is about, is to get the final bits of files released. But I think 99% of them are out. Guy's files and the things seized from his office would have been in that release, unless it's in that last little bit that they're holding back because it's something really embarrassing. But I think it's far more likely that it was seized by the CIA. That's my personal opinion, just based on inference, not like hard evidence, but
especially if it was dealing with Cubans or Cuban exiles, because they come to find out years later, they're funding these anti-Castro Cuban groups, to the tune of like $50,000 a month for things like the DRE that Carlos Bernier was involved in, and of course all that didn't come out until way later. But
Well, and that actually, I'm glad you brought up Ringe, because something really, really struck me with him and with Oswald. So I'm coming at all this stuff, like I said, late in life. I didn't study all this growing up, and but I'm coming in it with 20 years of teaching experience, and I cannot diagnose like learning disabilities, developmental delays, that kind of stuff. I cannot diagnose that. However, I've seen it a lot, and I kind of know what it looks like. And when you look at Carlos Bringuet's account of Oswald approaching him, he just walks in like in front of God and everybody, not knowing anybody. He just said, "Hey, do you want me to blow up the Huey Long Bridge?" Just walks up and says that to me. You cannot tell me that a CIA agent would do that in front of God and everybody. Number one, if he was like so deep state in the CIA, that is so clumsy. Number one. And number two, Bringuet was taken aback the way he reported it. Now you could make the argument that maybe Bringuet is not being honest about it either. I mean, you could absolutely make that argument because again, if all this was CIA involved, I don't trust a word of it. But even Bringuet is kind of like, "Sir, this is a Wendy's. We don't do that here." So, but so you have Oswald, who has struggled with mental health since he was very young. His mother reported that he was very difficult as a child. And what difficult means, I don't know what that looks like. But then, of course,
and coming from her, she had several problems as well.
Exactly. So
I mean, who knows?
So then you got somebody who is from a young age struggling. And I had a person make the claim to me that Oswald's mental health issues as an adult were likely to do all the brainwashing. It's like, no, I don't agree, because he had troubles from the time he was young. So if you're looking at a developmental issue that's present from the time he was young, that could be trauma, because again, like you said, the mom is something else on her own. You got trauma. To me, this reads like autism.
Yeah, I was going to say he's probably on the spectrum somewhere.
I have a strong, and this is again personal opinion, I can't diagnose. I've obviously never met Oswald. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but again, I'm a teacher and I see this stuff all the time. He reads autistic to me. And that does not mean that people who are autistic are violent. That is not what that means. What that means to me is that you've got this, let's say he was, let's just say he was. And then you add on all this complex trauma from growing up with that mother and being abandoned a couple times. If I remember correctly, she put him into care. Was it?
Yeah, she gave him up for adoption for a little while. Yeah. And, he's going to like 15 different schools by the time he's 15.
And as a teacher, I've seen it. It's deeply traumatic. And
moving all the time.
Yeah. Posner's book describes how he would just sit and rack the rifle, the Mannlicher Carcano, open, shut, open, shut, open, shut, just over and over and over for hours. And there was an assessment done of him, like some psychologists in the 60s got together and kind of tried to kind of spitball what was going on with him mentally. But so the biggest thing to me that says that there was a conspiracy was the sheer amount of cover up that happened, right? But the thing I cannot get over is I don't buy that somebody as unhealthy as Oswald was an active like CIA agent. He could have been maybe a useful idiot, maybe and again, I'm not saying that people with autism are idiots. I'm using that colloquial phrase of a useful idiot just for clarity. Because I have a lot of people in my life who have autism. I have a lot of people that I care very deeply about that have autism. And
like he might have been really good at learning and writing Russian.
Right, exactly.
So hey, let's use this guy.
And you've got special interests.
And see what happens.
Yeah, you've got these special interests. There's just a lot of things that to me point at it. But also, and here's the caveat, and I always try to remain objective. I am looking at Oswald's behavior through my own filters, and I know that. And I could definitely be wrong. But if I had somebody in my life exhibiting those behaviors, I would be taking them for an assessment. If it was my child, if it was, so, and again, this is not against anybody in the autism community. It has zero. Having autism does not mean that you'll become a criminal. That's not what that means. I do think that it might have changed how I say it because I think it might have changed how Oswald looked at the world. There was also there was also the situation down in not New Mexico, sorry, Mexico, where he was turned away at the Cuban embassy and he ran out in tears. And his emotions were so out of control, he was sobbing publicly. And then the embassy had to, I don't remember if it was the embassy or if it was I think it was the Russian embassy. Yeah, they were having a game and he pulled a gun and they had to cancel the game. So this is not somebody who screams to me CIA agent. These are not subtle. There was something going on with Oswald, and it had, at the very least, it was trauma. At the very least, it was trauma how he grew up. And that does. And I had another person push back with me on mental health issues, like when I brought them up, and it's like, I'm not trying to excuse it. I don't think that he shouldn't be held accountable. Let's say that he wasn't killed by Jack Ruby. He absolutely should have been held accountable. I'm not trying for anyone to escape accountability. What I do, where my brain always goes is like, how can we prevent this in the future? And it's about understanding what happened and what broke down.
Yeah, but and it was a lot, when you're talking about how the Dallas police reacted and treated everything right after the assassination. They really screwed up.
You're right. Everybody dropped it. Yeah, everybody screwed it up.
In the FBI, you come to find out that Hoover reprimanded like 25 agents from the top down to the local field office. He sent Hosty to wherever, Kansas City or wherever he sent him, purgatory. And, with everything that the CIA was into, they didn't want that to come out. And the FBI, like you said, Hoover always wanted to look like they could do no wrong, like they were super agents,
obsessed with the image, absolutely obsessed with it.
Like even in movies, in Hollywood movies, the FBI couldn't be portrayed ever getting shot. They always had to get their man, or else they couldn't use the FBI in the movie, type of thing. But a lot of these agencies, like you said, the CIA, the FBI, the Dallas police, they all made huge mistakes, and they all had a lot of things to cover up. It doesn't necessarily mean that they were involved in the assassination per se, but if investigating the assassination is going to open up all these Pandora's boxes and expose all of their shortcomings and things that they don't want public, then they're going to take steps to put a lid on things per se. If it be shutting this guy up over here or clamping this down over there, because I'm sure you've, heard about the incredible witness list, of people, these early deaths of people surrounded with the Kennedy assassination, and Guy Bannister's on it, it's just, it's insane. And I don't think Oswald was a CIA agent either. I don't think he was, really knowing what he was doing. I was actually we just did an episode on looking at his early discharge from the Marine Corps, and they let him out early. He goes home to his mother, supposedly to help her. He's there for 3 days, and then he goes to New Orleans, hops on a freighter, and he's off to Europe through Helsinki, and he defects to Russia. That to me seems like it's some kind of an orchestrated thing. Like you just don't suddenly decide to quit the Marines, and 3 days later you're off on a boat to Europe to defect to Russia without some kind of a plan. But I could be wrong,
and I kind of, again, that's another situation where the sword could cut both ways. You could say that Oswald was so impulsive and out of control that he was just and there, in that situation, it's often made a big deal about where it gets pointed out, well, the State Department paid for him to come home. Well, at the time, the State Department paid for any American citizen who was trying to get back home that got stranded to come home.
Yeah, they couldn't just leave him there.
Yeah. So I get really,
I don't have enough rubles to make it back.
Well, and that's the other thing that strikes me about Oswald is that while he was in the Soviet Union for a while, it was, this is the best thing ever. Capitalism sucks, blah, blah, blah. And then he realized, this kind of sucks.
Right.
And then he comes home and then he's kind of, the grass is always greener for Oswald. Nothing was ever good enough for Oswald. Nothing was ever Oswald's fault. Like his situation, like with the debt and their financial strains that they were having, nothing was ever his fault. He was viciously abusive to Marina. And to me, this speaks a lot more to someone really struggling over someone who has been recruited to the CIA. That just, I can't quite get past that. And but again, like I'm fairly certain that guy was in on this with the CIA, at least on the Bay of Pigs, and then they disavow every, like, all knowledge of ever having worked with him. So again, how much of this stuff about the CIA is them trying to sow confusion? Who knows? If you've ever read the Trail of Destruction series by Chad Nagel, it's egregious. He documented the worst of the destruction of evidence by the CIA, and some by the Secret Service and some by, some other folks, but mainly the CIA. And it is positively egregious how much has been destroyed. So there's got to be something they're hiding. We'll probably really never know what it is. The remaining documents that have not been released have to be, I actually agree with the statement. I believe Robert F. Kennedy said this, but I could be wrong, so please don't quote me too hard, in which he said, at this point, we're so far past the assassination that the documents that they're withholding, there's something has to be very deeply embarrassing to the agency at this point, because he finds it highly doubtful that
well, nobody's still alive from
exactly. Everyone's dead. And there's no point in withholding that stuff. So it's got to be deeply embarrassing to the agency. And I kind of agree with that. I kind of lean toward, I think he's right.
Well, I know him and Trump recently had that little thing at one of Trump's campaign stops where, he said, he's going to put RFK Jr. in charge of his assassination committees. Mm-hmm. And that they're going to get their files released for sure this time. He didn't do it last time when he was president, but he said he was going to do it this time for sure.
Well, and when I find that interesting and I find that tantalizing, but I also kind of think, they did that same thing with Guy, where the guy running against the Morrison for governor said, oh, by the way, this guy Bannister guy, he's really cool. He'll be the head of the state police if I'm elected. Yeah. I think they're making political hay. It's I am conservative. I'm not a Trump person myself. I'm not on the Trump train. I look at the Huey Long episode and then I look at the Trump campaign. And I don't think that Trump has the ability to control all three branches of government like Huey Long was able to do down in Louisiana, but he's a populist, and I don't believe what he says when he's talking about the JFK assassination. I think he's just trying to get an election won.
Well, my fingers are crossed.
Mm-hmm.
These ones, the toes on my feet, they're crossed too.
Yeah.
We can only hope. I mean, they got to come out eventually, hopefully. Mm-hmm. I'm just curious to see what they're hiding or what they're not releasing for what reason.
It's got to be something kooky, and I'm with you. I really want them released, and I hope the lawsuit is successful. But I haven't gotten a recent update on the lawsuit, but they have a lot of really high hurdles to clear to be able to sue the agency.
I don't think they're gonna. I mean, it's a noble effort, but I don't think they're gonna.
It's an uphill battle.
Yeah. If you do want to catch up on what's going on with the lawsuit and everything, you can trot over to jfkfacts.org. That's led by Jefferson Morley, author Jefferson Morley, and he's a really good resource.
Gotcha. Yep, we are familiar with him here. One thing I want to ask, so in one of the episodes you went into did Guy know Jim Garrison? And one thing I remembered from the JFK movie, and this was when Garrison and a couple of his investigators were in that square where everyone was around, he goes, "Oh, Guy Bannister. I used to have lunch with him."
Yeah.
Where did that come from, Garrison? Because I remember in one of the episodes you talked about a potential relationship.
Garrison was in the FBI too, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Former FBI guys.
Yeah.
It's not out of the realm possibility that they would have lunch once or twice a year or something like that.
Right. And or if they met at conferences or trainings, because Garrison was over in Seattle and Guy was in Butte. And as the crow flies, I mean, that would have been quite the distance apart then. But as the offices are set up, that wouldn't have been that far apart. So it would be entirely plausible that they knew each other. The document that I have is okay, and take this as you will. It was on the UFO story. Somebody had taken like a screenshot of the UFO story from the newspaper in what was that, 47? Yeah, 1947, and then superimposed the text saying that they knew each other by 1947. That's entirely possible. I don't know for certain, and again, it's really difficult to tell that if it was true or not. So,
right. Which is
I wonder if that was like one of those Japanese balloons that they were sending over here. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. Well, no, back then Japan was sending over.
I did a whole episode on it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if that's what it was.
The UFO turned out to be a hoax. It was a couple of boys were having fun with the locals. They didn't anticipate it was going to get turned over to the army, though, and it blew up rather quickly. But he did respond to a Japanese bomb up in Kalispell. And that one, thankfully, it was not, it was a Japanese balloon. I shouldn't say bomb. I don't think that particular one was a bomb. Some of them were bombs. Some of them were weather instruments. Some of them, they had different purposes. The one did blow up near us, in Thermopolis, Wyoming. I believe the only deadly bomb was in Oregon. A family was killed, and it was absolutely horrific. But I think they were the only deaths involved.
And they covered it up, right? Wasn't the family?
They didn't allow any sort of news release about the family dying, because they knew the Japanese were monitoring the papers, and
they didn't want to let them know it worked. I guess they got on this wind stream across the Pacific. I think that's correct. I learned this from you, and that's
thanks.
It was thousands of balloons sent by Japan. I had no idea as a semi-World War II buff.
Yeah, 300 of them made landfall. One made it as far as Michigan. Wow. But there were several that it mostly hit the Western United States, as you could imagine.
And Guy was, as part of the FBI or the precursor to it, was responsible for tracking them or keeping track of them.
Yes, at the time, the FBI initially was deemed the agency who would respond. At the time, I think if I remember correctly, again, this was like 5 episodes ago, so I can't quite remember, but it was eventually turned over to the Army, if I remember correctly. But I could be wrong about that. I know people will be coming at me in the comments.
Our commenters are pretty cool.
Yeah.
So Janet, you've been very generous with your time with us this evening. And before we let you go, though, I do have to ask you a question.
Oh dear. Okay, I'm ready.
All right. What, if you could give us a little preview of what your next season is going to be about and when we may expect it?
I'm shooting for January, and it will be the JFK years. I'm going to go through each the evidence for his involvement, the evidence against his involvement. And then I have an episode planned with another podcaster. We're doing a joint and episode in which we talk about what makes all of this so difficult to discern the truth for, with all of the innuendos, the rumors, the outright fabrications, trying to surf all those, and why is it so difficult to figure out what actually happened. And that particular person does kind of like the psychology of conspiracy theories, and it's called Single Bullet Query. And so we're working on planning that episode right now. I've got a couple episodes already recorded for it, and it involves interviews with some of the people I've mentioned, the gentleman that did that's helping with the lawsuit with the CIA and everything he's documented. I've also got an episode already recorded with a professor in Mexico who made a major discovery regarding Oswald's time in Mexico, and where he took down a major part of what has been generally accepted to have happened in Mexico. So
yeah, a bunch of crazy stories in Mexico.
Oh, absolutely.
I still don't know if he was there or not, 100% either way.
Mhm.
But yeah, that's just me.
Yeah.
Hope maybe you can convince us otherwise.
Yeah, he caught somebody in a really big lie, and it was through just some gumshoe putting things in order and checking stories and dates, and he was able to catch somebody in a gigantic lie. So, Dr. Sotero, he's a cool dude. So,
Yeah, well, Janet, I just want to say, so I've listened to all 9 of the episodes. I love it. I think the premise of what you're doing, skeletons in your closet, you're really objectively looking at your relative, Guy Bannister, in a very fair way. And I do suggest that all of our listeners go to Skeletons in the Closet on whatever platform and listen to it. Subscribe.
Please rate, review.
Yes.
Listen to it in order, 1 through 9. Don't just jump to 9, because you're going to get a lot of context on who Guy Bannister was. Yeah. And he's a very mysterious figure. And, I flip-flop on my thoughts on him. I'm not saying he was a plotter or anything. He has those connections. They're very mysterious. David Ferry, you can't, and Oswald. But I'm really looking forward to season 2. Season 1 was amazing. And I can't thank you enough for joining us.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And I get probably the most views on Apple, but I'm also on Spotify and all the major platforms. And please rate and review. We're also on Patreon under Dapper Jackalope, and that's my podcast company. And it's just me and my husband. He does all the techie stuff, and I'm the talent.
Yeah,
there you go. Well, he does a great job. Your podcast sounds fantastic, production-wise.
Thank you.
You have a great voice too. For
oh God, love you. I had to get over that. I had to re-record that first episode probably 4 times. I kid you not. I was really struggling with it because nobody likes the sound of their own voice, and I speak completely differently than I sing, and I teach singing, and I don't. The way I come off on the recording is not how I hear myself in my head, and it took me a long time to get over myself on that one. So.
Yeah, well, you're definitely over it because it sounds great. You sound great, and you sounded great this evening. So thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We had a blast. We'll put all your links in the show notes.
Yes, all your links will be in the description below, where you can find everything about it and check it out. And we have this little. We have a new. What do you call it, Joe? A new tradition.
Outro?
Yeah. A new outro?
Oh.
Yeah, where we sing and dance with Dean Andrews for like a minute.
Oh, heck. Oh,
okay. No. So, yeah. Dino.
You could be silly. And we do hope when season 2 comes out, maybe you'll come back on and we'll chat about some more.
Oh, that'd be great. Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yep. Thanks, guys, for checking us out, and we'll see you next week. Until then.
Everyone subscribe to her stuff.
Yes. Hit it, Dino.
In parish prison. He dare not talk for the record, but he said, "Come to Bourbon Street and I'll show you what I think of the case." The greatest lies are told in the name of truth. The greatest crimes are committed in the name of justice. The quotation is Jim Garrison's. It could be used for him or against him in this strange case. Good night.
Thank you.
And
for that.
we're
That was-
out.
Woo,
See
we're
ya.
out.